Okay, let's continue where we left off. Okay, so these monks were responsible for preserving some of the great classic works, not only of Christianity, but also the classic works of Greek and Roman literature. And so we owe a lot of the knowledge that we have uh, of the past to them. They preserved knowledge during the time when much of civilization collapsed, as we'll see in later lessons as well. All right, let's look at some pros and cons. From Italy, the Benedictine rule, or the guidelines for monks prepared by Benedict, spread rapidly over Western Europe. The monks offered a great service in the period between the ruin of the old Roman civilization and the growth of the new nations begun by the German conquerors of Rome. Monasticism had its faults. While individual monks took the vow of poverty, monasteries often grew rich, and discipline frequently became relaxed. The Benedictine conception of the Christian life was also essentially unnatural, requiring separation from the world and ordinary social relationships. However, for people in the declining Roman Empire in the early Middle Ages, the monastic calling seemed to be the truest form of the Christian life. We must recognize the immense service the monks provided in the spread and development of Christianity and civilization in a difficult time of European history. All right, we turn now to chapter 14, the Sage of the Ages, which is about Augustine. He's one of the most famous people in church history. Maybe you've heard of him before. If not, this is a good chance to learn who he is. In 410, Alaric, the Visigoth leader, laid siege to Rome. The Visigoths charged through the gates and plundered the city, causing ruin throughout. A short time later, the Visigoth troops withdrew from Rome, but the world would never be the same. Refugees from Rome fled in all directions, including to the North African seaport of Hippo. Not the animal Hippo, but that's the name of the location. The city was named Hippo. Augustine, Bishop of Hippo, heard the cries of shock and lament and decided to address the question of why Rome had fallen. His answer provided light for the days ahead and a philosophy for the foundations of Christendom. Christians to this day have received significant influence from Augustine. All right, let's look at preparations for greatness. Augustine was born in 354 in a region we know today as Algeria. His father was a heathen, worshiping the traditional pantheon of Roman gods. His mother was a Christian. Augustine attended school, traveling to Carthage, where he gave in to sexual temptations, had a son named Adeodatus, and lived with his lover and son for 13 years. I don't know why he didn't just marry his lover, but he was involved in this apparently committed relationship, but not actually being officially married, or so it was ultimately seen as a sinful, immoral relationship. Despite his moral failings, he was always intellectually bright and he committed his life to a search for truth. For a time, he became part of the Manichaean faith, which pictured the universe as the scene of an eternal conflict of two powers, one good and one evil, with humans being a mix of a good spiritual aspect and an evil physical aspect. Like Gnosticism, Manichaeism taught that the true spiritual Jesus had no material body and did not actually die, and that the purpose of Jesus was to teach human beings the way out of the kingdom of darkness into the light. So it has some connections to Christianity, but it's not a true Christian belief or true Christian theology. It's a heresy. Uh, Augustine remained a Manichaean for 9 years before becoming dissatisfied with its teaching. During this time, he taught grammar and rhetoric. Augustine moved to Rome and then to Milan, where he became a professor in the State University of Milan. His mother and some friends soon joined him. He reached the peak of a successful career, but was dissatisfied with his life. In Milan, Augustine came under the powerful teaching of a bishop named Ambrose. From Ambrose, he learned that Christianity can be both eloquent and intelligent. He also was inspired by the personal example of the monks who withstood the temptations of the world, which made him feel shame at his sin and moral powerlessness. In agony, he walked through his garden where he heard a child's voice say, "Take it and read it." We don't know exactly why the child said this. Apparently, or it may have been part of a children's game or a children's nursery rhyme kind of song that the child was singing that he just happened to overhear. And he took it to mean that he should read the Bible. So he opened the New Testament and came across a passage of exhortation not to live a life of rioting and drunkenness, but to take the Lord Jesus and deny the lusts of the flesh. And obviously, these were uh, things he had been engaging in for much of his life. And so this really hit home for him when he read this. Instantly, he was converted to Christianity and felt a sense of peace. He was then baptized by Ambrose, along with his son and a friend. Augustine then returned to North Africa, and both his mother and son died within a short period of time. 3 years later, he was ordained a priest in Hippo, and later he became bishop. Let's look at the Donatist controversy. North African Christianity was torn by a conflict between Catholics and a movement called Donatism, which stood for a holy church and the resistance of unworthy bishops, or that Christians should resist and avoid church leaders that were unworthy. So very similar to what we saw in the previous lesson regarding not accepting leaders who had um, lapsed or denied the faith under persecution, but also dealing with other types of moral issues in this case. So Donatism was almost 100 years old when Augustine became a church leader. It arose from Donatus, an early bishop of Carthage who led a protest against Catholic practices and condemned the bishops who had handed over the scriptures to be burned during the persecution under Diocletian. He even argued that the Catholics did not make up the true church, since Catholic priests had been ordained by bishops who had committed the sin of apostasy. Augustine rejected the Donatists' view of a pure church, arguing that the church must be a mixed multitude until the day of judgment, with both good and bad people in it. So this might be worthy of debate. What do you think about this issue? We do ideally want a church to be moral, but we have to recognize that everyone is still sinful. And sometimes we do find that even in best churches, and even among people that we thought were moral, we do find that there have been moral failings in people's lives. And of course, we all do have some moral failings, but in some cases, people we thought were holy have had serious moral failings. Um, So Augustine also set forth a different understanding of the sacraments, meaning the practices of the church that were instituted by Jesus. Uh, we Protestants typically focus on the Lord's Supper and baptism, but the Catholics have a total of 7, as we'll see in future lessons. So Augustine has this understanding, arguing that the sacraments are acts of Christ, not primarily of the priest. Thus, the validity of the sacraments does not depend on the moral standing of the minister, as the Donatists taught. The Donatists would have taught if you're baptized or receive the Lord's Supper from a priest that's later found to have moral failings or has engaged in apostasy at some point, then that's not valid. You have to be baptized again or have a more true Lord's Supper. But that would be very hard to manage, keeping track of all that, or being sure that you find the right priest that's moral. Possibly it would be a complicated issue. So Augustine taught that that's not necessary, but the acts themselves are acts of Christ, even if the priest performing them is or has been immoral. So the priest is merely the channel for God's grace to the members of the church. His defense of the Catholic Church in the Donatist controversy also led Augustine to support the use of force in the suppression of the Donatists. He taught that the state should keep them in control or even arrest them and punish them. Let's turn to sin and grace. The Pelagian debate further brought forth Augustine's emphasis on salvation by grace. Pelagius was a British monk who came to North Africa from Rome, along with a follower named Coelesius, who unsuccessfully sought to be ordained as a priest in Carthage. Coelesius then headed for the east, where churches were more receptive to the teaching of Pelagius. However, Augustine launched a literary attack on Pelagianism. In other words, he wrote against it, and his writings spread and became influential. Pelagians were eventually banished by the emperor Honorius and condemned by the General Council of the church meeting at Ephesus. Augustine opposed the teaching of Pelagius because it denied that human sin is inherited from Adam, claiming that humans are free to act righteously or sinfully, and that it is possible not to sin, meaning that people can go their whole lives without committing sin. They have complete free will and complete choice in the matter. So if you look at all the people you know, I doubt you know anybody that is perfect, that has never committed some wrong action. So Christians believe that's because we all have a sinful nature inherited from the first humans, Adam and Eve, who rebelled against God. But Pelagius did not believe or understand that. He thought that each person had the choice and theoretically could live a lifetime choosing to do good and essentially be a perfect person. So this teaching stood in contrast to the experience of Augustine, who sensed profoundly the depth of his sin and hence the greatness of God's salvation, based on grace to save him from his sin and keep him in the Christian life. In Augustine's view, Adam's sin had enormous consequences, stripping him of the power to do right and causing spiritual death, or the theological term is the fall, which is shared by the entire human race. It's passed down or inherited from the earliest humans, passed all throughout the human race. Since humans can do nothing good, all power to do good must be the free gift of God, meaning God's grace. Out of the fallen human race, God chooses some to receive the gift of his grace, and those to whom God does not send grace are lost. This is the teaching known as predestination, more associated with John Calvin in the Reformation times, but Augustine had at least some of the initial ideas in this regard that Calvin later last John 2 and further developed. So humanity has no power or worthiness. Salvation is fully from God. Augustine felt that he had been captured by the grace of God, given the circumstances that led him to the Christian faith. So later, the Protestant reformers would depend greatly on Augustine's view that humanity is incapacitated by sin and that only God's grace can rehabilitate people. So especially the reformers Martin Luther and John Calvin, but we're not covering them in this class as much. We'll see them if you take the Reformation and Modern Church History class in the future. So Pelagius's teaching was condemned by the Great Council of Ephesus in the year 431, as it had failed to grasp how greatly sin distorted human nature and how God's grace was needed to turn toward him. Yet the church came to distance itself from Augustine's ideas about predestination, which critics claimed had negated human freedom. There's still an ongoing debate about predestination and human free will. So taken to the extreme, we get to this concept of predestination, but Christians at least have to affirm the Bible's teaching that we are saved by God's grace, not by our works, that we are all sinful and spiritually dead because of our sins, and only God's grace revealed through the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus can save us. Okay, we'll turn now to the city of God on the ruins of Rome. After the sack of Rome, or the conquering of Rome, Augustine welcomed refugees, finding shelter for them and encouraging his growing congregation amidst the devastation. In his teaching, he turned to the questions of the relations between earthly cities like Rome, which rise and fall, and the everlasting city of God, which led to his great book, The City of God. He wrote that humans fall into two cities: the godless mass of earthly people and the company of spiritual people called to the city of God for all eternity. The worldly city, of which Rome is an example, is united by love of temporal things such as human praise. The city of God is united by love for God. Augustine considered the church the only human community that worked for the building of the city of God. He believed that the state should ultimately submit to the laws of the church. Augustine's grand spiritual vision led to the city of God becoming the best loved of his works throughout the Middle Ages, as it gave an interpretation to the woes the world was suffering while promising a better future. Augustine's life became more difficult in his old age as the barbarian Vandals swept east toward Hippo and laid siege to it. As he was dying, he had Psalms copied and fixed to his wall so he could read them in bed. He died in the year 430. When the Vandals broke through the walls and swept into Hippo, most of the people were dying or had died from hunger. So this was one of the difficult times in the leading up into the Middle Ages, as these barbarian tribes were conquering Rome and other cities as well. So here is Augustine, one of the great theologians of church history, very influential, and his writings are still fairly popular to be read. He wrote numerous theological works. In addition to the City of God we mentioned, but I would say probably his best known work today is his spiritual autobiography called Confessions, or the Confessions of Augustine. So if you study much about either theology or spirituality, you can learn about Augustine, learn from his theology, as well as his example. His work is one of the great spiritual classics, his autobiography, in which he writes about his life with an eye on God's work in his life and what led him to become a Christian, as well as what how God led him throughout his life, even as a Christian. All right, so our primary text today, I chose this writing called Augustine's, this writing from Augustine called Admonition and Grace, also known as On Rebuke and Grace. So I chose a short selection that will describe his views on God's grace, as well as how that affects human free will. So let me scroll through this very slowly so you can get a chance to read it. You can also find it online. So the first part is the chapter 2, the Catholic faith concerning law, grace, and free will. I'll scroll through it slowly if you want to read it. So this is, you'll read this in order to answer the extra credit questions for today. And I may also ask you something about this on the test, so it's good to know as well. This will also include chapter 3, what the grace of God through Jesus Christ is. Moving on to chapter 4, the children of God are led by the Spirit of God. So these chapters are very short, as you can see, only about a paragraph or so long. Okay, for the attendance assignments, please write 1 to 2 paragraphs to answer the following question, and please don't write more than one page. But I also want to encourage you, don't write just one sentence, try to write maybe at least 2 or 3 sentences or a full paragraph, just to describe what you've learned. Um, and I encourage you to not just copy from the notes, but try to put this in your own words. So what is one main idea you learned from today's lesson? And if you want to do the extra credit assignment, then based on the above reading from Admonition and Grace, briefly describe Augustine's understanding of the role of grace in assisting human free will and doing good works. Okay, that will conclude our lecture for today. But before we close, we've got some time, so we'll cover a study guide for the midterm exam next week. So next week, there will be no lecture. You should not receive a video like this, but you'll just receive the test that you take on your own and then email it to me. All right, so let me cover a study guide for that to prepare you. So this is the study guide for the early and medieval church history midterm exam. This guide is only to help you prepare for the tests. You do not need to send your answers to me. So please do not send me this like completed as if it's your assignment. This is not an assignment. This is only for your purposes to prepare you for the midterm exam. If you do send it to me, I'm not going to grade it. So don't think you're earning any extra points or any credit by doing so. Okay, so to let you know what's on the test will include mostly multiple choice, true and false, and a small number of matching questions. There will also be a few short essay questions and some questions for extra credit. So I do cover all the bases. I do think it's important to be able to write out things, so I don't only give you multiple choice and true and false, but that is most of it. There's just a very small number of short essay questions. So the study guide gives 35 questions from which the main test questions will be drawn. If you can answer these questions, you should be able to answer the main test questions. Extra credit questions may be drawn from additional class notes not included on the study guide. So if you take the chance or take the time to do this, it is a fair amount of work, but you'll be in much better shape when you take the test. And the test, you should be able to finish much quicker if you have completed this first. If you don't want to do it, that's fine. You don't have to, but I'm just giving you this as an option if it helps you. But if it doesn't and you think this is too hard, uh, then that's fine. You don't have to do it. And this does have just blanks or actual questions that you write the answer to or blanks you fill in versus the test is going to be more, it's going to be mostly multiple choice, true, false, and matching. So in that sense, it'll be easier. But again, this will help you. Um, if you have this done, you'll know the answers already. So the test will be that much easier. So, all right, the first set of questions will come from lecture one. Number one, the term blank means good news and describes the Christian message about Jesus. Number two, while Jesus is central to Christianity, its roots or the roots of Christianity go back to blank history, which can be seen in the Old Testament, the first part of the Bible. Number three, the movement Jesus led followed the movement that had been begun by blank. So there was someone before Jesus that began this movement. Uh, what's that person's name? Number four, blank are non-Jewish people. Probably all of us qualify, unless any of you were Jewish. Number five, blank was the Roman governor of Judea who tried Jesus and sentenced him to death. Most of these questions, by the way, are in the Bible, but they're also in the first lesson. Number six, those that Jesus called to follow him full time were known as blank. Number seven, blank was the first Christian martyr, the first person to die for the Christian faith. Number eight, blank was the Pharisee who persecuted Christians before encountering Jesus and being sent to spread the Christian message to the Gentiles. Number nine, most of the growth of the church in Rome was from the blank classes of people. Okay, that's all from lecture one. Now, the next set of questions are from lecture two. Number 10, based on wrong understanding of Christian practices, critics accuse Christians of these two things. Blank, what are the two things? Number 11, a surprising accusation against Christians was blank, since Christians did not worship the traditional gods and had no images of their God. Number 12, the most significant reason for Roman persecution of Christians was over the issue of blank. Number 13, the blank believed that Jesus was a mere man who became the Messiah. Number 14, blank describes the view that Jesus was a spirit who only seemed to be human and thus did not truly die on the cross. Number 15, blank was a movement that emphasized enlightenment by secret knowledge, which typically taught that the soul is good and that the body and physical world are evil. The supreme God did not create the world, and Jesus came to give knowledge to a secret group. Number 16. The term blank or measuring rod describes the collection of books the early church saw as authoritative and included in the Bible. Number 17. Blank was a Gnostic heretic who developed his own canon, which did not include the Old Testament. Number 18. The church developed the idea of a closed canon in response to Blank, who caused problems with his claim to be a prophet with ongoing revelation from the Holy Spirit. Now we'll move on to the questions from lecture 3. Number 19. The office of Blank became more powerful, eventually overseeing the church and entire cities. Number 20. Name some examples of serious sins which caused an issue if people committed them after baptism. Number 21. The Emperor Blank persecuted Christians with torture in the year 250 in order to make them deny their faith. Number 22. Blank established a theological school in Alexandria and used popular philosophy to teach people about Christianity. That might be more than one person, if I remember correctly. I think there's two names that go there. 23, the Roman Emperor Blank oversaw the most violent persecution of Christians. Number 24, Blank was the first Christian emperor of the Roman Empire. Number 25, Blank was a false teaching that claimed that Jesus was a created being and lesser than God. Number 26, the Blank settled the debate over Arianism. 27, Blank developed the church's teaching about the Trinity. Okay, now finally we have questions from lecture 4. Number 28, Blank spread the false teaching that Jesus had a normal human body, but divine wisdom replaced a human mind in him. Number 29, the teaching associated with Blank failed to see the divine and human natures of Jesus as united. Number 30, Blank defended the view that Jesus had only a divine nature which absorbed human nature in him. Number 31, what was the main point of the statement of Chalcedon? Number 32, Blank is often regarded as the first monk. Number 33, Blank developed a popular set of regulations for life in monasteries. Number 34, Blank emphasized human freedom to choose good or evil, arguing that it is impossible, or that it is possible for humans not to sin, and that humans do not inherit a sinful nature. Number 35, Blank taught that humans inherit a sinful nature, which causes spiritual death and takes away the power of humans to do good without God's grace. So 34 and 35 are opposite teachings, and you can notice that those two names should be opponents, as you'll see in the lecture, or as we saw in today's lecture. Okay, there'll be again some short essay questions that will come from the weekly extra credit assignments. So I encourage you to do those if you haven't had a chance. I'll still accept them if you haven't done them yet, but I encourage you to look at those to help you prepare for the essay assignments or the essay questions on the test. All right, so that concludes the study guides as well as the lecture for today. Now, if you would like a copy of the lecture notes or the study guide, just email me and ask for that, and I will send them to you, so you'll have plenty of time to study and prepare for the midterm. And then next week, you'll just get the tests sent to you by email, and you can return that to me by email. If you have any questions, feel free to email me and ask me. If you happen to be in my class, um, my Thursday's class, you can also ask me if you happen to see this before the class. So hope you all have a great week, and I'll see you next time. Good luck on the test. Take care.